I like trains. Morning, YouTube! Austin on Sugar here. You ever think about how weird it is that we've got a whole environment in games dedicated to trains? Just some weird oversized machines that pull stuff from one place to another, and they show up in games right alongside your open grasslands, your dangerous volcanoes, your awful ice levels, unless there's skating in them. You'd think even secret underwater volcano labs would be more popular, but here we've got trains and train yards and subways all showing up in games that can squeeze them in. And I love it. Even horror games are getting in on the action. But what I want to know is, why? Why trains? What makes a good train level, and why are train levels so darn good? As a nerd who grew up on Theodore the Tugboat like the rest of you, I feel qualified to weigh in on this very important matter.
I'm Pinkie Pie. Hop on my train.
My Little Pony.
All aboard!
Pony train.
So what exactly is a train level? I know that sounds like an obvious question, but trains are enough of a niche subject to make this weird. Emerald Coast isn't a water level, even though it takes place right next to water. Yet Radical Train never lets you on its train, but hits the same vibes as something like Wreck Train, where you can never get off. On the flip side, I wouldn't call something a train level just because it's got a train in it. Ah, looky here! This Roller Coaster Tycoon map lets you build a train! Guess it's a train level now. There's gotta be something more to it, but let's start from the basics and work our way up. First up, let's get this out of the way. Your train level needs a train. Duh. A big thing on wheels that follows a track. Usually a train already in motion, though stopping a train or watching it pull out of the station isn't uncommon either. Anything that makes a good, action-y set piece. Trains are big thing carriers, and seeing them carry big things to somewhere helps hammer home that yes, they're real and they're doing their thing. I think that taps into something primal that little kids always adored watching Thomas or construction videos, or There Goes a Train. Hey, anyone remember that?
I'm Engineer Dave!
Point is, there's always something captivating, even nostalgic, about watching a train working like it's supposed to. Following the rails, transporting stuff. Bonus points if you get a good look at what's in the containers they're carrying, even if sometimes that knowledge can be painful. That way you're not left wondering, oh, hey, I wonder what's in here. It might just be the sense of moving parts, watching the wheels turn, or the stick thing that connects the wheels. I swear I used to know what that was called. I think a good train level doesn't just have a train in motion, it lets you appreciate that train in motion. So often there's a point while playing through that you can just stop and watch the train go by if you're not on board yet. Mad props to devs who account for this and keep the view open and interesting. Or let you watch the train cycle on the main menu like Project 06 does. Seriously, I think I could spend hours just watching trains go by like this, seeing all the cars passing, wondering what, how much they're carrying, where they're going. Anyway, the view once you go on top of the train instead of being on the rails ain't bad either. I know there's a lot of technical workarounds to making trains convincingly move when really it's just the background scrolling usually. Easier to program. But that doesn't stop the vistas whizzing past from sometimes being really beautiful or interesting. Seriously, so often I wish I could hop on a train and watch the world go by. But I'll settle for it in games, so long as devs continue to mask how much that landscape is looping. Have I seen that tree before? When you slow down and really vibe with the travel aspect, all those familiar sounds start hitting you. The clangs of couplings pulling against one another, the chugga-chuggas that show up everywhere. The best levels incorporate these sounds into the music like the instrumental version of word painting. Wario Land 6's train levels open up with the chuggas. And then once the escape sequence starts, you get all sorts of clanks and clangs backing your own panic as you make your way back to the start. The title screen to Spirit Tracks times the chuggas with the rhythm of the melody. After you board the train in United Railroad, the guitar strumming gets an added layer of distortion that just so happens to sound like that classic effect. It stands out even more than the actual sounds of the train going on in the background. I don't think it's a coincidence that every song on the stages we're going to be looking at today is in 4/4 time and paced around rhythms that match the sound of an engine. Yakuza Metro even adds a layer to the soundtrack when you're on top of a subway that pushes that feeling even more. And Radical Train? I bet I could write a whole video just on this soundtrack alone. Everyone needs to throw on a good pair of headphones and go through the abandoned mine in the chase. Even the sound of the... This is embarrassing. As a kid, I called these things ding-dings, and I still don't know what they're actually called. The, "Hey dumbass, a train is coming" signs. Extremely nostalgic. You know, Baby Austin would always take the train tracks instead of the road in Calamari Desert because he thought it was a shortcut. 3 guesses how that worked out for him. But to the stage's credit, I still have so many memories of that train, running alongside it, forgetting the race entirely, getting hit all the time. I don't think my love for trains comes entirely from nostalgia though. Mirage Saloon in Sonic Mania and Hat in Time's Train Rush are fairly recent examples that give me the same feeling. It can't just be that trains have good kinesthetics though, right? There's gotta be some deeper reason why it's so easy to get attached to the trope. I hope, anyway.
Take the train. Take the train.
It's probably not the first thing to come to mind when you hear train level, but Chapter 4, Rope Burn from Mirror's Edge, has a whole section where you duck into a subway station to avoid cops on street level. There's a lot here, but I think what's most interesting is how the moment you hit the metro, there's almost no breathing room until the chapter is over. You're sliding under grates with blues on your tail, have to fight your way through an abandoned station, platform over subway trains, often while under fire, dodge and weave away from oncoming traffic, parkour over deadly spinning fan blades, ride on top of the train instead of being on the rails, and hop between them to avoid oncoming pipes and girders, and then last minute get away from an incoming train wreck. That's a lot, and it doesn't really let up. Puts a whole lot of pressure on you just because trains are fast and dangerous and you don't have time to be careful. That sense of pressure is all over the trope. Radical Train is about chasing down runaway trains that are on a crash course. In United Railroad, you're spending the first 2/3 of the stage catching up to a getaway train. Then once you're on board, you're dodging all sorts of high-tension obstacles, from crushers to aggressive enemies to, oh hey, more ducking under head choppers. This shows up a lot, doesn't it? It's not uncommon to be under a time limit before the train blows up or crashes or something. Sometimes you fight a boss at the other end of the train. Sometimes you do both at the same time. Even in lower stakes train stages, you might have to dodge oncoming trains or time crossing the tracks at risk of getting run down. You might have to race the train to obstacles or checkpoints, or even just catch up to it. But you're almost always not allowed to sit still or calm down, and when you are, everything is noisy and chaotic, and would someone please tell Eggman to hurry up? I'm trying to prove a point here. Could fall asleep waiting on this train, jeez. The one time you'd think you're supposed to keep calm and process things in Rope Burn, when you need to time your jump so you can take the train to escape, the blues are torching down the door right next to you. You can't dilly-dally at all. Funnily enough, despite the names, and the fact that the train is canonically scheduled to derail, what the hell? Wreck Train and Derailed Express are some of the calmer train stages out there. I was really confused coming into this video why Wreck Train is all about tossing some rubber balls around. Like, what does this have to do with trains? And I think I'm closer to understanding now. Neither of these levels are big on thinky puzzles so much as they are about your performance. The wind is pushing you back, forcing you to account for the change in physics, these exhaust pipes launch fire. It's all making you worry about what you're doing more than how you're doing it. Trains are action set pieces. It's no surprise they'd want to keep what you're doing lively. Rail Canyon, yes it counts, there are trains all over the place, keeps you suspended high in the air with only these thin rails between you and death. Those are stakes. Exciting stakes. Stakes that blow up sometimes. Even something more slow-paced, like the high-speed cargo station in Hot Shelter, has doors that pop out with enemies that are primed to attack. It's like the sheer fact that the train is moving means you can't stop to think. Sometimes literally. Sunset Park Act 3 is an auto-run stage. And even though it expanded on the concept and gives you free control for most of it, Triple Trouble's 16-bits version still has facts shooting at you, and a big wall of fire chasing you down on your journey to the engine. I'm convinced there are more trains that blow up or blow you up in games than there are ones that stay functional. For something with such a static structure, trains really step up that sense of progression and confrontation. Confrontation usually means somebody's looking for a fight, even if that's just some dork tossing a bomb and blowing up the car you're on. You're fighting your way to the head of the train. Climactic. And did I mention how common boss fights on trains are? If you're going to have a boss, it's almost certain you'll have to fight while the train is still rolling. It's intense. It makes for a hell of a backdrop to see locations dart past when you're taking a beating from someone on your level or above it. Something I only just realized recently in Spark 2 is how the stage on a train and the stage after, where you're dodging a bunch of oncoming engines, have this looming sight of Titanic Tower in the background, 2 stages building up to a later one. Stakes build as the story approaches its finale, so the pace ramps up to account for that. Even if I still don't know why you're fighting a robotic dragon where the engine should be. I do love their little animation afterward. Like, no, stop. It's really cute. In Laboratory 19, you fight a jet, and it's got pretty expressive animations for a remote piloted machine. Even if it's not exactly a boss, there's a certain amount of tension in wrecking the core to the bullet station trains, blowing them up as you move on to dismantle Eggman's next operation. Same goes for Wreck Train. You save the train from wrecking by blasting out its engine core. It's not the most graceful solution, but this is Wario we're talking about. Slash Beast gets to be the one running to catch up to the military train for your fight, and since the train is in motion, there's almost this sense that you feel trapped, like you can't get off or get away. There's no choice but to fight. Suddenly all that high speed and those passing vistas form a prison around you, and that's pretty tense. Charge Man's pretty aggressive too. Dude just rams you down and doesn't let up unless he does that, which is tricky to dodge. And then in Mega Man ZX, we get...
Me not Maverick. Me Pseudoroid. Me Buckfire.
Okay, what the fuck?
Uh-oh, gotta speed up!
No
Whose idea was this?
power.
The stilted speech, weird talk of rules like some honor-bound code, flaming arrows, the headdress. It's anachronistic before you take the English dub into consideration, and it's not like this is Capcom's first rodeo. Tomahawk Man plays with Western cowboys and Indians themes and is styled off a very modern American take on Native American stereotypes, and still feels way less yikes than Buckfire. At least the cowboys are working with him here. But this? I'm not even sure where this came from. His stage is just a regular train, like so many others we've looked at. Like, sure, it's running through a rocky desert, but so is the train in Calamari Desert, and it doesn't take anything from... Oh. That's not just a train whistle. That's the Dewey Woo from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Y'all know that theme, right? The whole... That one. For those of you who don't know, Il Buono, Il Brutto, Il Cattivo is a classic Clint Eastwood spaghetti western released in 1966. I couldn't possibly tell you how it holds up today, but its influence on media is still felt even from just that little musical sting. The good old Mexican standoff is in here, along with Texan drawls and a lot of cool guys being cool while they just kill other slightly less cool guys. I'm not sure how that flute bit came to be associated with train whistles in games, or if it even did. That might be a misnomer Child Austin made, where the sound of the Wild Wild West just made sense to be associated with the blare of a train whistle. That would actually make a lot of sense, given how much the horns and strings in Wreck Train's theme pull from the Lone Ranger style television of the time. But the Dewey Woos got me puzzled now. Sure, sometimes we've got trains rolling down tracks in Western American-looking deserts, but Radical Train's just some abandoned mine, and the music still hits that same blaring note like a far-off train whistle. And even though it's a far more industrial setting, the moment you land on the train in United Railroad, the guitar hits a chord that's the same interval as the Dewey Woo. That could just be because it has become such a staple of train stages by now, but let's not forget that United Railroad is a level where you catch up to Eggman's train before he fights Dirty, leading to a one-on-one encounter with him. You're chasing after him, looking for a fight over the emeralds. If that's not a Western standoff just in a new setting, I don't know what is. Sonic vs. Eggman at high noon and all that. Suddenly, all those boss fights at the head of the train take on a new meaning. It's not just that you can't get off the train, it's that your character won't. They've come so far, they're not about to give up now, even as you're forced to stand across from your opponent and show him there's a new sheriff in town. Heck, I'd completely forgotten before recording this video, but even in Mirror's Edge, the chapter with a subway train opens with a one-on-one standoff with a wrestler who's out to kill you. Sure, Faith isn't using guns, but it's still a mano-a-mano fight, ending in only one of you standing. And don't think I'm overlooking that Slash Beast, Wildman Maverick, is part of the Repla Force, a group of Reploids all labeled Maverick at once so the hunters could go in and kill all the dissenters because they're too violent and barbaric. So is that it? Trains are inextricably tied to old spaghetti western themes of cowboy vigilante justice and violence, honor-bound confrontations, and manifest destiny as we take on the natives? I'm not convinced, but it's hard to ignore how much of an influence that old train of thought has had on the level trope. Maybe on games in general, like, we have to consciously push back against it, or get caught up once more in archaic themes. But then, what else are trains in gaming, if not an excuse to play cowboys and Indians again? As a kid, I never realized the correlation. Then again, I could have just been an idiot. Buckfire registered as a caveman to me, not an incredibly questionable stereotype. I'm not sure I can put it into words easily, but I do know there's a feeling to trains I can't get elsewhere, even in settings that by all accounts should hit the same notes. Not literally the same notes. Like, if train stages are just your character on some moving thing following a path, then how come convoy stages feel so off in comparison? You know what I mean, right? A big line of trucks zooming down a road, or since this is video games, so often you get a fleet of airships soaring across the sky in formation. Big clumps of platforms you can't afford to fall off while making your way to the head vehicle. How is this any different than train cars?
Time to find out where the booty is.
Oh man! Doesn't she know by now? We always go in from the back and end up messing it all up.
In a 2D game like ZX Advent, this shouldn't be any different. Practically speaking, you're on a series of mechanical-looking platforms coupled together with some gaps you'll need to jump over, all moving together against a scrolling background. This shouldn't feel like a separate stage trope, but it does. Why else would ZXA put it back to back with Ash's train level? It's not redundant, because it feels different. I don't think that's because we're in the air, either. A proper convoy of trucks will still get that rush of the ground beneath you, so it's got all the same moving parts as a train, but somehow it still feels off. Like, not knocking these. Any kind of variety in stage aesthetics is great, of course, but I just don't feel like I do on a train. I know this is silly, but I think it's that some part of my brain knows they could always just steer the truck somewhere else. You're not locked on a path, or if you are, there's always going to be wiggle room to maneuver. No highway is so narrow that it's practically a track. Unless you're like playing Hot Wheels or something. Trucks just aren't trains. But they're cool for their own thing, I guess. There's something specific about being locked on a predetermined path that make trains click with me. Maybe it's the fact that you know where they're going ahead of time? How about roller coasters then? Those are track-locked links of cars that show up in platformers a lot. And I love roller coasters. Like BC19, I'd regularly go to theme parks just to ride the same rides over again. Now I just have to get my fix from games, I guess. I love how in Asteroid Coaster, you get to watch this tangle of different tracks converge as you make your way through. Lots of different pathways, dropping off or looping around set pieces. You have to jump off at the right time or switch tracks to avoid dying. Hey, we've seen that with trains before. And this is great, really. It's got the same pressure and tension that I love. But again, I feel like something's missing. I can't move faster or slower if I want. I'm stuck on a set piece and at most get to jump. There's no real control over Sonic in Asteroid Coaster. Meanwhile, in Asteroid Coaster, you can hop between cars, but you can't get off without risking a death. If you're on a coaster, you're stuck on the coaster until you're allowed to leave. This isn't exactly track you can run along, and when you do run along the track, like in White Park Act 2, you're only running on the track. Like, there's no illusion of freedom to do what you want here. You're wedged between two rails and aren't going anywhere these rails don't, at least until Act 3. Then the track might as well not even be here. But this is weird, right? I thought being stuck to the track is what was missing from convoy stages, but here we are in a track or die situation, and that's too much? It can't just be the fact that roller coasters are suspended high in the air, right? Like, I watched this in the background, and that still feels limited. But Rail Canyon never felt so constrained, and that's nothing but rails in midair. What gives? Is this all in my head? Are trains not actually all that special, and Austin's just imagining things again? I said something unintuitive a minute ago. White Park has no illusion of freedom. It feels, honestly, a bit cramped, if anything. For a while writing this video, that seemed too obvious to even need to explain, but there's something odd about describing trains as freedom, of all things. They're big thing carriers, stuck on tracks that go where they're supposed to, unless something goes horribly wrong. Trains are even purpose-built, machines that were designed to carry things and never stray from their routes, no matter how much Thomas wanted us to believe otherwise. These engines still all have drivers, robotic or not. And yet I don't. Sure, the train is stuck moving forward along a predestined path, but I can swerve and duck and weave as much as I want. I don't have to be on top of the train instead of being on the rails if I don't want to. There's this great moment in Rail Canyon where a train is rushing at you and you just intuitively jump over it. You're not stuck on the rails, but the train is. Is that the trick to all this? That train tracks lead somewhere, but trains can only ever follow them? There are these Rhinobot things that follow the rails all throughout Bullet Station. Sometimes you can see them swap from one rail to another, but they're always rail locked. If they hit the end of a rail, they just blow up. If there's something in their way, they just hit it. The only other choice they have is to stand still. It's almost ironic, I think, that these are the guys who blow up pieces of the track to stop us when we can just jump off. We can go on the tracks when we want, and leave them just as readily. We're not ever going to be rail-locked in a good train stage, but trains always are. United Railroad is a level all about catching up to a train just pulling out of a station. We have to navigate this old train yard turned scrapyard while the train just chugs along in a straight line. Like, seriously, the level design was really carefully crafted that no matter how much we swerve through this tangle of turns and obstacles, the train is always moving straight forward until we catch up. And despite the Pythagorean logic at play here, we do catch up. The subway in Mirror's Edge eventually has its brakes forced. It's blocking the tunnel. But that's fine, Faith can just leave out the nearby door. This goes double for the level right after, where the train can actually block oncoming bullets from the blues. The metro might be built by the city, but the trains themselves are neutral. They can't pick a side. Same goes for the transports in Starbuster. The passenger train Sonic has to save can't dodge bombs like he could. Wreck Train can't stop itself, but Wario can stop it. Even though she's locked to the tracks in Lost Park, Knights can still stretch out and lean off the main path like real trains can't. The Repliforce supply lines that Slash Beast is protecting can't keep moving if there's a break in the tracks. The train would need to stop, but X and Zero don't have to. I think this is the bit I was missing. Trains are purpose-built and route-locked. The player never is. You aren't being used for anything when you play a game. You're here to have fun, go on an adventure, explore some fun characters. Things a big, powerful engine will never get to do. No matter how serious or how goofy your train stage is, the player will always have more freedom of movement, intent, and value than the utilitarian train that serves as their backdrop. Limitations only breed creativity for those who are willing to be creative. Historically, trains have meant a lot to a lot of people. When Cowboy Day Americans were building the Transcontinental Railroad, I'm sure that trains represented freedom to them quite a bit. After all, they were the ones laying down the tracks. The freedom to go new places was facilitated by these novel machines, and they got to choose where these machines could go. But passengers don't get that same kind of choice. We have the starting point, the ride, and the destination. I guess that's what makes games special, huh? We can explore all sorts of settings that might be mundane or utilitarian, and transcend those real-world limitations to have an adventure wherever. With a little practice and training, heroes don't need to be told what to do. Adventurers don't follow prescribed routes. But I guess when you set your eyes on your own destination, there's no question that it's full steam ahead. I never expected this video to get so involved. Seriously, when my co-writer and I sat down to throw this whole thing together, it was just supposed to be a holiday-appropriate celebration of my favorite level trope. I never expected things would inflate to include social commentary. Aw, geez, am I a real gamer essayist now? There were a lot of details and love for the individual craft of some of these stages I had to leave out of the script. Train levels are intense, and often involve a lot of moving parts that devs need to bug test out, so it's extra impressive to see so many of them land, you know? Maybe I'll get to those some other day. If you're listening to this, thanks for sticking around until the end. I'm not gonna do the typical YouTuber prompts, just means a lot that some nerd rambling about trains kept your interest this long. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go play just about anything that isn't on wheels. Train has stopped sounding like a word.